Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Ian Holder, Chair of this committee. I'd like to draw your attention to the following: housekeeping and safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Do not attempt to use the lift. Please assemble by the statue of Queen Victoria in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you're finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Please can I ask members and officers to introduce themselves, starting from my left.
Peter Bell, City Solicitor.
Councillor Stuart Brown, Liberal Democrat, Fratton Ward.
Richard Dare, Councillor for Nelson Ward.
Judith Smythe, Councillor for St Jude Ward.
Lee Todd, Head of Marketing and Communications.
Richard Locke, Assistant Director of Procurement.
Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Kelly Nash, Corporate Performance Manager.
Helen Clem, Finance Manager, Technical Financial Planning.
Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Thank you, everyone. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillor Spencer Gardner. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in respect of the items to be considered at this meeting? Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda, definitions of sexism, homophobia, biphobia and transphobia. Lee Todd, Head of Marketing, Communications and Engagement, is in attendance to introduce the report. Lee, members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw committee's attention to? There's no minutes because it was only 2 weeks ago, so it's not been finalised yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, I think the report sort of sets everything out there. This has just come forward following the notice of motion last year to include the definitions from the UN on biphobia, transphobia, sexism and homophobia in some of the information we're putting out around equality, diversity and inclusion. So it sets out there how, as we requested to bring a report here, to set out how that's going to be included into the planned work. So, yeah, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions on the report? No, nothing from me either. Members, it's recommended that the committee notes the work outlined in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion, which includes the recent notices of motion agreed by the Council. Members, is the report noted? Thank you, Lee. Next is item 4 on the agenda, Corporate Performance Report, Quarter 2, 2024 to 2025. Kelly Nash, Corporate Performance Manager, is in attendance to introduce the report. Kelly, members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. No, not particularly. It's obviously one that comes in regularly frequent cycle to this committee, so people will be generally aware of the content. We have changed the format to try and make it a bit more engaging than the past. I think that was one of the regular kind of comments. There's a lot of information there. If there's some way we can make it more engaging, use graphical information, so we've tried to do that, and I hope that is useful to the committee. Otherwise, the recommendation is just to note the report and to confirm that the report gives you assurance that there is a framework in the organisation to monitor and manage performance. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I like the look of the new report. It's well laid out and makes it nice and clear, easy to read. Members, any questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Kelly. Could you give us a little more information about the sorts of frameworks that are in place, particularly around looking at the page on the data on looked after and care experienced young people? Obviously, we haven't got any historic data to compare it to, but it seems to me that the number of severely absent children is very high. But I'm also assuming that because it says it's the sum of the number of absences, is that including occasions where the same child is absent on multiple occasions? So it's not 779 individual children, it's 779 instances of absence.
No, sorry, in that occasion it is that many children who are our number that we are concerned about for severe absence, and what they're talking about there is the sum of absences. So it might be there's been a period of absence and maybe things have started to regulate, but over the course of their measurement period, they would have given us cause for concern to be severely absent. And you're right, it's a lot. It is an area that I know colleagues are really concerned with, schools are really concerned with, and it's where a lot of work is going to try and improve that. Attendance had improved massively in advance of the pandemic. Obviously, as people will know, there was a massive hit then taken to attendance figures, and it is taking some time to get back to where we would want it to be, but it's certainly something where there is a lot of work undertaken. But yeah, there are concerns about that number of severely absent.
Do you have any details with you or to memory on the sorts of things that are being done to manage the issue?
I can't speak to that in detail, but I will get a briefing note sent round to just to let people know what is happening. But yeah, that is certainly something. There is a lot that we can report.
That'd be great, thank you. And I've got a second question. This is just me not quite understanding possibly, but on page 51, I've noticed that one of the KPIs that states that it's been met or exceeded, I'm just skimming to the page to remind myself exactly what it was. Yes, the ferry port traffic. It says that they met or exceeded the budgeted levels of ferry income, so why is it an orange KPI, not a green, if we've hit the target?
Thank you. Councillor Simpson, have you any declarations of interest?
Firstly, sorry I'm late. Traffic is an absolute nightmare. I think there's something going on. Nothing to declare. Are we already on number 4? I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
Judith, you had a question.
Yeah, again, that's not something I'll comment to the detail of. I certainly know that those issues around transitions were reflected in the work that was being done around the big conversation in education, so it is a very live conversation. Again, if there was a particular recommendation that was picked up, I can just check on the progress of that, but it's not something I'll speak to in detail now.
I think when you've worked
Sorry about that. The second thing is, I mean, this is overall is impressive. We're obviously doing a whole load of stuff. We're doing it quite well. There are, as before, and Kelly won't be at all surprised by this. We've been having this conversation for about 9 years. That a lot of the things we're trying to achieve are activities like doing this, you know, having these many sessions, supporting that. They make me say, so what? Because you can actually put in place a service and you can give yourself a big tick, but it's not very good, or it's not working, or it's the wrong service, and it doesn't tell us what the impact is on the service recipients. I want to see more of these things to be outcome based. So, in other words, ensure that more children are attending school would be a nice outcome. I don't care how many sessions you put on. If it doesn't make any difference to the children who are not attending school, then it's unimportant to me. And there are quite a lot of this. There are ensuring that the organisation is doing all it can to be environmentally responsible in its activity, including reducing carbon emissions in line with our zero commitments. Yeah, that's fine, but why don't we have a objective saying reducing carbon emissions of Portsmouth City Council, especially the City Council itself, and then we'd be able to measure actual impact. And I think we've got some difficulties at the moment of actually measuring baselines on that because of staff being on maternity leave and things like that. There are a number of these, and they all make me want to write in a large red pen, so what? And I really do think that after all these years of me boring on about this, and I don't do it all the time because it would be very dull for everybody, we need to be more outcomes focused. And that's what I want actually to see, an increase in the number of children attaining qualifications at school and enable them to go on to higher education, for example. I don't care how often we have a workshop to talk about it, actually, or we write a strategy about it, because if it doesn't make any difference, it won't happen. Just, may I have a third question? Very briefly, we've got a lot of things going on in housing, our activities as social landlord. How much do these reports, and I thought very little, reflect the recent difficulties we've got into with the inspection, which has discovered that it is, I mean, I do think our housing service is very good, actually, and I think the inspectors, as ever, have made a point they have to make legally, which is about the number of gas heating and so forth that's inspected, and it's very difficult to gain access. I used to run a housing association, so I know how easy it is to be caught up with that. But reading through this, I wouldn't know that that had happened, and I wouldn't know that it was now a major target of our planning in housing to do enough gas safety inspections and do them on time. And so a comment about that would be very useful, please. Reading through this, it doesn't seem anybody's noticed that that's quite a big crisis for the housing department, actually.
Would you like me to respond to those points? So yeah, in respect of the question about outcomes, and as Councillor Smythe said, this is one we revisit, so if I can beg your forgiveness to bore on, Chair, it is very, very much the case that on a quarterly basis, what we do tend to report on is activity figures. On the annual basis, when we come forward with a narrative statement of the accounts, is when we tend to look at more about, and the so what question, what difference is made to the outcomes in terms of what we've actually delivered, and that's the place for that. Partly because if we're going to report these on a quarterly basis, you actually don't tend to see those longitudinal changes happening quarterly. What we are reporting is, are we doing activities that will bring about the changes that we want to see? What this also reflects is the corporate plan that is set and accepted by council. So actually that's where the wording comes from in terms of those objectives. So that just sets the context around that. In terms of the housing inspection, this report reflects Q1 and Q2, and obviously the inspection followed that, so that's why there's not a reference to it in this particular report, and there is always that little element of time lag on when things come in the cycle, so that's absolutely reasonable to pick up that doesn't reflect that, because it wouldn't in this one. There is absolutely work happening to bring that in Q3. I suppose what I would say is, again, that reflects that tension between the outcomes and the activity, because as you've alluded to, a lot of the things that are reported there are very activity focused and not really outcome focused, and again they almost come a level down in the activity to where we would have been reporting. But you're absolutely right, and it has been noted that because of the significance of it and the interest and public interest as well as member interest there will be in that we will bring that forward as part of Q3, so that's been logged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just to follow up really on what Councillor Smythe was saying about the activities and how do we measure it. I mean, obviously we are looking at quarterly at a time, so surely we're measuring it from each quarter and what's working, what's not working, but as you've mentioned also, we're also looking at other councils. So I suppose the question I have really is what measuring tool or what standard are we looking at to deliver on with our outcomes? And that's a very, very open question.
Yeah, and it will be different across the board. I don't think we'd say there is one measure that we would use for an entire authority. Each of the different professions have different professional standards. Each of the different functions have professional standards that you would look at. There are different benchmarks for those. So broadly, when we put this together, those are reflected in some of those targeting. Some of those will be national targets we're expected to hit. So, for example, within the planning framework, there are national targets that are given to us. We have to achieve those, and that will be where our standard comes from. For other things, they're very locally set. They're locally maybe unique services that we're providing. We will be setting our own benchmark around those, but actually largely attributed to, well, what's the outcome we're trying to achieve, and therefore what's the level of activity we need to drive to achieve that outcome. So I think there are lots of different ways. There are lots of different ways that we set those benchmarks. Lots of different ways that we necessarily assess whether we're meeting them. Some of those will be very numerical. Some of them will be much more qualitative and might be to do with customer feedback or any of those things. So I think it's a very, very broad range of different ways that we measure those things. What you see in this report is very much a subset. So actually, this is an enormous report, I'm really aware of that, and it is a tiny fraction of the information that we collect across the organisation, reporting on a regular basis into the different elements of that. So if there may well be other things that you'd be interested to see, it may well be that they are held in the organisation, we just don't bring them in this particular subset, which is very much trying to give a flavour of this is where we are progressing, and again, to give assurance that there is that wider framework within the organisation that this is driven from.
Just to follow up, so how do we, how do we assess it? After each quarter, if you've got 2 quarters, half a year, and something's not working, do we then make a change, or we just keep it going for the whole year? I mean, I'll give you a really good example. Swimming. It's something that's activity that every young child should learn in Portsmouth, but there's so many young people that don't know how to swim, and I know that sometimes it's always put through the schools, but the schools have a lot of problems with transportation to take them to swimming. So how do we assess that problem, as that's a necessity really, for a young person to learn, considering they live on an island?
I mean, I think it's an interesting example of one of those things that is an issue. The extent to which it is the local authority's performance issue, I think, is obviously for someone to consider. We do get information on those sorts of things, but not probably in the granular way. So I don't think that we have any report anywhere that tells us the exact number of young people in Portsmouth who can or can't swim and to what level of proficiency. We do have things that tell us roughly what that might be. So we would know, for example, in terms of participation in the under 12 swims, for example, we might know something about participation within the curricular classes. We will get stuff from, for example, Sport England occasionally run surveys and things like that that give us information. So we'll be able to discern stuff. Could we say exactly who does and who doesn't and what we would do about that? Not particularly, but what can we do? We can put in place activities that we think will broaden participation and support, and that might be things like the free swimming for under 12s and what have you. But whether that's a performance issue that we would bring into this, because have we decided it's a corporate priority, that's probably the moot point. And as I say, this is very much what comes to you here is a subset of that wider information, and is very focused on the things that are identified within the corporate plan when agreed by council.
My lifelong quest for outcomes, the outcomes approach does fit better in some areas than others. We do have information about the number of children that drown, which is in a different report, and that is the outcome, of course, if we want to reduce the number of children drowning. But we don't keep the information in a form that distinguishes Portsmouth children or children that are visiting. So that's just how far away we are from being able to really assess some of these things. Planning is a very good example. We're now 95% compliant on, more than that, I think the last figure was 99% on majors. We're doing very well in processing planning applications, something you couldn't have said 2 years ago. It's an important thing to measure. But I've yet to see an outcome measure which says whether we're a more beautiful and usable city than we were. And that's the outcome. And in that particular profession, it's a much more difficult, much more long-term, much more nuanced thing. But there are certain things, care for young people being a very good example, where outcomes should be looked for. Because we have in the past, and I don't think particularly here, wasted a lot of money putting on classes or lessons or sessions which simply don't work. And that's what we've got to start to really tackle. And I think Portsmouth isn't terrible among local authorities about that. It's pretty good. But that's where you need to be looking for outcomes, because we might find we're wasting some money, even now.
I think that's kind of, I'm trying to put it more in layman's term. Essentially, how many quarters do we go past until we realise the plan isn't working and we go to plan B? I think that's really the question I was dithering around.
I think there's a good deal of flexibility in some services here. I do know people where they have changed practice midstream and said it's not working. Cut apart from anything, if you put on a session for a young person, they don't come, you know you've got to do something else. And we're fairly flexible here on that. I say that with the benefit of having worked across the country on these issues. But yes, that's as sure as anything is a good thing to do.
Richard,
thank you, Chair.
Richard, did you have something? No. Just add one thing. I think it's page 32. Most of the graphs in here have got figures from 2 quarters, but page 32, ensuring better outcomes for children, only got the first quarter figures. Is there any particular reason for that? Yeah.
As well, so I'll double check whether there's a particular reason for that, but I can't think of anything that would have particularly driven that, so I can't check.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions? Members, it's recommended that the committee notes the report in a revised format and confirms assurance that a framework is in place to monitor and manage performance in the organisation. Members, is the report noted? Thank you. Thank you. On to item 5, Treasury Management Policy 2025-2026. Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance and Resources, and Helen Clem, Finance Manager, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report. Is there anything that you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. No, nothing in particular. There are no great changes from last year's Treasury Management Policy. This is something that we bring here for note, and then it normally goes on to Cabinet and then on to full council, but due to timetabling, it actually went to Cabinet yesterday instead. So, it's just our operational framework. It's how we manage the Treasury activities. It considers our borrowing position for the council. We take a very forward-looking approach to this. And it's linked closely with our capital expenditure plans and our cash flow requirements. It then defines our parameters which we can operate within, which is our annual investment strategy, which sets out how we look after the council's surplus cash and our approach to managing risk. It's important that we apply the SLI principle whenever an investment decision is made, so to make sure that the money is safe where we're banking it, we're able to access it as well easily. We work within parameters for doing this, and then once these two criteria have been met, then we will look at the yield, the return that we can get on our investments. So that's really all I have to say on it. I'm open for questions. Anyone has any questions, please?
Thank you. Members, any questions on the report? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question regarding the recommendation around foreign currency. So on page 90, we've got the assurances that the international currency transactions will be based on countries with a good credit rating. On page 100, we've got limits based on geographical region. Both very sensible things to look at. My question is, do we have any frameworks for making sure that we're only purchasing foreign currencies from countries that don't have ethical or human rights considerations that are in conflict with the Council's priorities and policies about values?
I will double check on that, but from memory we generally only hold euros. We have a euro bank account, and sometimes, especially through the port, we might need to make more Nordic countries or something like that. And potentially we do use dollars as well. So we don't have anything else. Only in very...
Until a few months ago, I would have had no ethical problem with dollars, although at the moment...
dollars before, occasionally. So, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Australian possibly as well. Who knows? Apologies.
Under paragraph 4.410, there is a bit of reassurance there. Were you referring to that, Stuart?
Not specifically, no.
4.410 says ESG credentials relate to counterparties as distinct from the country where the counterparty is domiciled. And it goes on to say the Council will avoid investments in such institutions where the state institution has a poor human rights record.
In which case, that's answered my question with a yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Richard?
I was going to say, in view of the maverick president we now have in America, are we reviewing our policy with dollars?
I'll hand that over to Richard.
I think in response to the previous question, we've just answered it in 4.410. So,
I mean, I will just add here that dollar is used quite universally around the world, so I think it'd be very difficult to kind of ban dollars, considering it's in so many countries, actually. I think that's one of the reasons why America's done so well economically.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? No. In which case, members, it's recommended that the committee notes the recommendations in section 3 of the report that will go on to full council for approval. Members?
I think we can take additional reassurances that there are very few changes between this and the previous version that we're familiar with in setting budgets and so forth.
Yeah, it's
and
fairly consistent.
we have experience that was relatively successful, really.
Yeah.
So I think that is an assurance I take. If there were lots and lots of changes while the world is going through the turmoil it is, I would have asked some more questions.
No, I think this shows we're going to be very stable. We'll try to be. So members, is the report noted? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. In which case it's on to item 6, the internal audit performance status report to 7th of February 2025. Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor, and Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer any questions. So members have read the report. Is there anything that you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
I think in relation to the performance report, no. We would be happy to take any questions that you have.
I just wanted to say that in terms of what's being looked at, this is much more outcome focused than the previous report, so I'm glad to see that. Not entirely enough, but much better. Thank you.
Thank you. Judith, microphone. Thank you. Any other members? Any questions? No? Thank you. I think everyone's happy. In which case, members, it is recommended, where are we? Recommended that the Governance Audits and Standards Committee notes the audit performance for 2024-2025 to 7th of February 2025. Is the report noted, members?
Can we need to say we're reassured by it?
We're reassured. Reassured and noted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And then we move on to item 7, the Internal Audit Plan 2020-25.
So I would like to draw your attention to a number of bits and pieces that are in the plan, but more so in relation to the Charter, because there is an implication on this committee. So in relation to the 25-26 audit plan, you'll note it's in a slightly different format. So it contains the full audit. We will report on any follow-up work that we perform throughout the year, and that will be presented as part of the progress report on a regular basis. And any grant work as well, we will inform you. But there was a comment raised a number of meetings ago that perhaps we should just have a holding spot for grants, and we should also have a holding spot for the follow-up work, so that there was less movement in and out of the audit plan. So that's the format that we've presented. I won't go on any further in relation to the specific audits that I've included, but can I draw your attention to some of the changes in the Charter? So internal audit have to abide by public sector internal audit standards. Those standards, you'll note within the Charter, are due to change, and it's global internal audit standards that we will have to abide by with effect from the 1st of April. Now, there's not huge implications in relation to those change in standards. They've basically built upon what was already in place. But the code requires us to spell out certain things in relation to, in effect, the board, and this committee is, for internal audit purposes, our board. So there are a couple of areas that we have highlighted within the Charter. So if I can take you to the pages of the Charter. So there must be an opportunity, and Chair, you know that you and I meet periodically to discuss any particular issues or concerns, but we also need to have the door open, and I feel comfortable the door's already been opened, that I could sit down with the committee for an informal discussion without any other officers being present. That is a requirement of the new standards. We've also got that whilst we tell you in the annual report the level of our resources, and if there's any resource concerns, you need to be fully aware as to the level of human resource and technical resource that we have available to us. And if there is any concerns that we are inhibited or unable to perform our main duties, then we need to share that with you. There are a couple of things within the standards that we can't wholeheartedly abide by, and that's because there are global standards. And the example that I would give you is that elsewhere in the world, the board would determine how much you would pay the Chief Internal Auditor. That is not how it works here. So that is not contained within. There is an element within the Charter that covers members. So when we're talking about members, though, we are talking about this committee. And within that, certainly under D, and this is under item 34 within the Charter, D and I have been added. And page 144 in the pack. So D is that the expectation is that you would champion on our behalf with internal and external partners, and that obviously, as I've already covered, that we would inform you of any resource restrictions or limitations that would have an impact. Most of what I've already covered will be embedded within the annual report, so it's just to draw your attention to it now. But if you have any further queries, so everything else is kind of as is, with the exception of those bits that I've added in, and it would be effective from 1st of April of this year. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Stuart?
You mentioned the annual report quite a bit. Does the new framework have any impact on the interim reporting that we've done in the past, or will that still carry on in a similar fashion?
That should still carry on in a similar fashion.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Councillor Simpson?
Yeah, sorry. Under the proposed audits, there's obviously some departments missing. So is there any particular reason why there's areas missing? Like property, for example. I can't see it anywhere, so I'm just curious.
You're talking about the proposed audit on page 177?
Yeah.
Okay.
Proposed audits. I'm just curious of why there isn't for corporate property, properties owned by the council, etc., etc. Just seems to be missing.
Right, okay. So the audits that are on the audit plan are full reviews that we will perform. The activities across the organisation go into their hundreds. Actually, they go into their thousands, but from an audit perspective, they go into the hundreds. We can only audit a number of them. So any reviews, for example, in relation to property, so there's one property one definitely in there which is towards the latter end, and that's to do with property valuation for repair and rebuild. But if there are specific concerns, we can always consider revisiting what audits we have within the audit plan. But if not, they will come up in future years.
I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit because I know that we normally have our lovely table of things that we've assessed and where they are from an assurance point of view, and I was just curious to know, considering we have such a great portfolio, especially considering we recently bought a lot as well last year, another portfolio of housing. I'm just curious if that should be audited, if anything, because it's new.
That is in there.
Okay.
Yeah, that probably need to have a
look. The Clarion transfer.
Yes.
Sorry, I did. But I think overall, I was just putting it as one big package. But yes, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, it's actually on the top.
In a separate account.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of putting it all as.
That's okay. If subsequent to this meeting, because I appreciate that those titles don't necessarily mean a lot to you, so if you have any specific queries, please raise or email, and I'll be able to share, or Paul will be able to share, as to whether we are considering whether it's tethered under another one, but it's not that visible. In relation to the housing inspection, I've agreed with the Director of Housing that we're actually doing a piece of work with them in support in relation to kind of compliance in general, so that will keep a watching brief. While they are fully aware, because they self-assessed and self-reported as to what the problems and issues are, they've kept us informed all the way along, and we will maintain visibility. Chair, do you mind? I've just had brought to my attention there was something else that I ought to have picked up on.
No, it's fine.
I've clearly not got my yellow highlighter out.
Which one? Page 140, 26.
So equally in relation to the Charter, item 26, which is page 140. Ooh. Right at the bottom, it's got there the internal audit function and our independence will be reviewed by the board on an annual basis, where the CIA has a role and responsibility within the organisation which sits outside of the statutory role of internal audit. We can deal with that in the annual report. That is because I do have other responsibilities within the organisation which could have an impact on my independence.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Just circling back to what Councillor Simpson was talking about, and hopefully it's of some reassurance to Councillor Simpson. Lizzie, it's fair to say, I think, that property and acquisitions always comes up on an annual basis in the external audit in terms of their risk. So it's definitely being assessed every year, not necessarily every single part of it under internal audit, but it is definitely being audited in some fashion.
I have no doubt at all. I just thought it would be interesting to have it into the proposed audit in full.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? No. In which case, members, it's recommended that members approve the proposed internal audit plan and audit charter and code of ethics for 2025-2026. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Brown. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Smythe, thank you. Is the recommendation agreed, members? Show of hands, please. Thank you, that's agreed. Thank you. Next is item 8 on the agenda. Whistleblowing Annual Report and Policy. Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor, and Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer any questions. Members have read the report, and is there anything you wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing to draw the attention to other than what's in the report. The policy has been reviewed and no changes. We had 2 cases this year compared to 6 in the previous year. As with whistleblowing, the details that we can give are limited, so they're in the Appendix A, but happy to answer any questions that we possibly can.
Thank you. Members, Councillor Brown.
Just a very quick clarification question. When it's talking about the areas that these were done in, and it mentions the director of the 2 areas, I'm assuming that means the directorates, not the directors individually?
Yes, correct. It's the directorates, not the director.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? No, I think we're happy with the policy. Nothing's changed and it seems to be working. Thank you. In which case, members, it's recommended that the committee notes the report and the attached Appendix A and consider whether any further action is required, and notes the whistleblowing policy, Appendix B, where there are no proposed changes. Is the report noted, members? Thank you. In which case we move on to item 9, Procurement Act 2023 and Contract Procedure Rules. Richard Locke, Assistant Director Procurement, is in attendance to introduce the report and answer any questions. Members have read the report, and is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
No particular issues, thank you, Chair. As it sets out in the report, we're required to update our rules to meet legislation, and there's been significant changes in procurement legislation, which I took the board through, the committee through rather, a previous meeting. Since the last meeting, the National Procurement Policy Statement was formally issued in February, which is noted in the report. That's enabled us to then finalise our contract procedure rules, which are laid out in front of the committee today for consideration, a recommendation for endorsement and then taking through to council.
Thank you. Members, any questions? No? In which case, members, it's recommended that the committee endorses the revised CPRs as attached in Appendix A and recommends that its next meeting scheduled for the 18th of March 2025, full council resolves to approve the revised CPRs as an amendment to Part 3A of the Council's Constitution to be fully implemented and take effect from the 1st of April 2025. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Brown. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Adair. Is the recommendation agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you. Item 10, exclusion of press and public. Members, the appendices to agenda item 9, procurement management information, contain exempt information as defined in part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Members, I propose that we consider the non-exempt report in open session and only move to the exempt session if members wish to discuss the detail contained within the exempt appendices. Is the committee happy with this? Thank you. In which case, item 11, procurement management information. Richard Locke, procurement manager, is in attendance to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The report follows the format that we usually take. In terms of highlights from the report, I would say in terms of spend compliance, we're still in a good position there. In terms of being able to trace spend to contracts that we're obliged to publish notices of on our Intend system. We need to do a little bit of work with social care to improve some of the tracking of spend transactions to contracts through the contract system, which we're aiming to do over the coming months. One thing to note in terms of higher value direct awards, that's contracts over £150,000 that we've direct awarded that haven't been subject to any form of previous competition, either like a framework agreement or another contract that we've tapped into that's already been competed. There isn't actually any to report on to the committee for Q3, which is a first. We're going to review that in Q4 to see if there is a backlog that then come through for approval. We have generally seen a reduction, especially since post-COVID restrictions coming off, where we had a high level of direct awards. But it does look a bit strange, so we are going to review that in Q4 just to double check there's no backlog. Typically, we end up with more direct awards in the early parts of financial year as contracts come up for renewal around that time, but we will review that. In terms of contract KPIs, we are continuing to roll out the KPI model. I think we're generally getting better information back from the services now, and from 1st of April, the new contract procedure rules coming in, subject to full approval by Council. We're going to be implementing that from £150,000 upwards, so we should get a lot more reporting on performance for our contracts, which will put us in a good position for the new Procurement Act, which has a lot more transparency requirements throughout the whole contract life cycle. In general, we're getting good levels of performance, so either satisfactory to good in terms of performance that's being reported, but we do have some contracts where performance has actually fallen to poor. I can't go into great levels of detail on those beyond what is in the report now, but happy to answer any questions in the exempt session.
Thank you. Members, any questions? And can I remind members that we're in open session and therefore we will only be considering the report at this stage, not the exempt appendices. Once the report has been considered, I shall ask members if they wish to discuss any of the detail in the exempt appendices. If so, at that stage, I propose we enter exempt session. Members? Judith?
This is a very, very full, comprehensive report, and I think we should acknowledge that. I feel a good deal of reassurance with this, having seen it develop over the years in various stints of time I've had in GASC, and we should thank the team for, as everybody, of course, but this is really looking like a kind of confident, open report here. I don't need to go into any of the other details on the own sheets, but I thought we ought to record that at this stage.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? No. Does anyone want to discuss anything in the exempt papers? No. In which case, thank you, members. I propose that committee notes the report, and as Judith says, thanks. And is the report noted? Thank you. The report's noted. Thank you, members. That concludes the business on the agenda for this meeting. Thank you for your attendance, and I close the meeting at 5:44.